Just answering questions with WAPTech. Someone posted some assertions about the people who did the Edward P. Murrow bombing, the Oklahoma City bombing. But here we go. The claim made first is that Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols went to the salt mines of Hutchinson, Kansas to meet up with an E.O.D. buddy to get blasting ANFO. The FBI report, however, says that they were at a lake stirring diesel and ammonium nitrate from farm fertilizer. Now, this is something people can look up, and I'm going to point out a tactic that's done by truthers. Post something that's bombastically not true, like a chip on your shoulder, and say, go ahead, point this out, because that way I know what to say immediately. They're going to do that. The history of the location you're talking about. Hutchinson. Rock salt was first mined in the area in the 1880s. In the 1920s, the Kerry Salt Company started mining in the area deeper as room and pillar mining method. 1990, the Hutchinson Salt Company was formed and purchased the mines, or mine in the area. Turned into a museum in 2007, opening day, Kansas Underground Salt Museum. It also became a location that's used for storing records and that sort of thing, deep underground military bunkers, another claim people made, and also it then got bought by some other company. And it's been renamed a couple of times. The Stratica location is what it's called most of the time, or just called Stratica. There's a bunch of sub-names for it. But your assertion that they went there is based on not being able to look up where they got their materials from, because they left a bunch of extra materials around building their bomb, and there's also a claim of a second Ryder truck that you're going to bring up next, or maybe not, I don't know. The person posting this may be just repeating something they saw on Facebook, and that's fine, but why did you come here to post this? Why didn't you just look up the city, the state, and their names? Who brings this up? Is it a YouTube video recently? Or is it some posting from a long time ago? The further and further down the road we get, the more information may be revealed, but you have to tell me what the source is. Or be lied about, which is what's going on here, most likely. But let's find out about a couple things. First thing, their motivations for Terry Nichols for hating the government was a credit card bill of $40,000 and a bunch of other shit going on in his life. And some of it was actual real justification for hating how the system works, but being anti-government somehow equating to something that happened because you didn't want to pay your bill and claimed to be a sovereign citizen in court and yelled boat captain. It's not that bad, actually. He said something different. But he did the same shit. What about McVeigh? Well, he racked up gambling debts and owed money and then tried to consolidate the debts by taking out some sort of a day loan or whatever and defaulted on that. Got pissy about that shit. He also did a bunch of shit that tells you what kind of person he is. It's a piece of shit. But the idea that this was inspired by or exclusively in revenge for Ruby Ridge, which is very different than Waco, which is another thing that they talked about, is a little over the fucking top, especially because of the reactions to it. But I have a separate video about that. But let's talk about where they got the materials from really, really quickly. Mostly by purchasing it. Their bomb plan was for a 5,000-pound bomb. They bought 2,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate from a Kansas location. They stole Tovak's sausage and some other materials from Martin Marietta Aggregates in Marion, Kansas. 7 crates worth. They got another 50 pounds of ammonium nitrate on another date, but that doesn't show that they stole it from any particular mine location. 350 pounds of high-grade explosives were stolen from a rock quarry, but it's not mentioned which one. But that's not the same as getting an E.O.D. guy to help you, or trying to imply the government was setting this up so that they could take the fall. Doesn't work. They got 17 bags of ANFO that they used to test as a bomb test to see if they could make the bomb correctly. Where they did all this was at Gary Lake State Park. They arrived in the same Ryder truck, pulled out all the ingredients that they had packed loosely in meshed up made methods, and then sat there and just mixed and built the thing. They did it there so that they could do it without being caught, so they could seal the thing up and make a big bomb out of it and not have to open up the back. And they ended up killing, well, the number of children is less than 20. As far as we know. The explosion they set off at the Edward P. Murrow building was so messy that we don't even know exactly how many people died. But the best estimate I can get, that's a declared estimate, shows around 19 kids, right? Yeah, 19 kids. Somebody could have been pregnant and with child, and that would have counted as well, but I just got the numbers I could get. The reason this is so vague isn't because of a cover-up or because people want to keep things vague, even in the truther area. It's because it was very difficult to figure out what was what. So anyway, the next set of assertions, just answering questions here, refers to their motivations. McVeigh did it in response to the tanks being used at Waco on U.S. civilians. No, his main motivation originally, the thing that really outraged him, was the use of mace or tear gas. He didn't give a shit about children dying. He just considered that part of war. He just treated this as a war activity. He decided that this was a war. And that he was fighting a righteous war against the government because of Ruby Ridge and Waco, correct? No, he started this shit originally because he was mad about a bunch of other things. That's just the last straw for him. But his real motivations for hating on the government, blaming them for every fucking thing, was different. And definitively, even though it was a bigger tragedy at Ruby Ridge, and complete bullshit that it was done the way it was done, and as an example, perfect example of what you're not supposed to do, even the courts acknowledged it. It's not the same as Waco. But at Waco, the guy leading the group was going to have everybody surrender at one point, and the negotiators went out of their way to ignore that and said that it's an impasse and it's impossible to negotiate with him, when he was dead-ass going to surrender very soon. After 51 days, they couldn't wait another 4 days. David Koresh, I think is the name he adopted, had planned to do what he was doing until a specific date, like Passover. And when it passed and nothing happened and he realized it wasn't going to happen, he realized, oh, it wasn't going to surrender because he's a bad person. He said, oh, it's not the time. It literally is that damn simple. It's essentially him saying he was wrong about the date. He realized it would be next year at minimum. And realized, no, we're just going to leave. All he wanted to do was finish writing up 4 things on a piece of paper concerning the seals that are to be opened before Armageddon, or whatever you want to call it. He had finished one of those 4, so he only had 3 left to do. They were like 4 or 5 pages. I'll have a link below in the description. No, they're not the same thing. But claiming Nichols and McVeigh met up with an E.O.D. buddy just adds to the mythology of it and doesn't give us anything in return. And you didn't say what date. You didn't say what this is associated with what they got. And saying the FBI report had them at the Lake Stern diesel and ammonium is not actually accurate at all. It's actually somewhat different. People have pointed out all sorts of details. But he didn't do it specifically about tanks because what was used were pieces of equipment that are a little bit different. Most of these things were demilitarized pieces of equipment. So is it the appearance of a militarized piece of equipment that you're worried about? They didn't fire a cannon. These were tanks. They could have used cats and bulldozers. That'd been different. One of them was configured a lot like a bulldozer, just, almost the same thing. These are armored pieces of equipment, so they get in close and damage the building, driving them out of their building, because they built the building to be impossible to break into. I'm not justifying what the FBI and the other assholes did. I'm just telling you that you need to not lie about this, or at least get it wrong. Don't get it wrong here. Tanks have no other purpose but for war, and AR-15s are war guns, so you can't have them. Anything looks like it, even though these were demilitarized versions. The parts are interchangeable between it and a fully automatic weapon, mostly. Well, not really. But, hey, we can use it as an excuse to make a rule. They are a sign of war. Now you're worried about the appearance of war. If a cardboard cutout of a tank is used, does that give you the right to murder somebody? If the appearance of creating an impenetrable fortress, is justification for trying to take it down because it's symbolic, which is really what happened. That's why the government attacked them at this occurrence. Is that justification? No. Do you want a special status where you're allowed to do things you won't let anybody else do? No. They blew up a building that housed FBI, CIA, ATF, and U.S. Marshals. As a matter of fact, the Edward P. Murrow building, you would be hard-pressed to prove that. You're just trying to make it the source of evil. It was a federal building. It also happened to have a daycare with children. 30 kids were murdered by falling debris and being burned at Waco. So you look up those numbers, right? As in acts of war, there's an eye for an eye, tit for tat, blood for blood. Hatfield and McCoy. February 28th, 1993, 4 ATF agents were murdered, and 6 Davidians were murdered, you could say that, in a shootout. Perry Jones, 64, had inserted a gun in his mouth to take his own life just before he died. Or someone else did it. Peter Hipsman put a gun to the back and the side of his head behind his ear to blow out the base of his brain, or someone else did it. Winston Blake shots fired at close range behind his right ear. Peter Gent shot by a sniper while on the water tower. Hayden Wendell, 34, was also killed. I couldn't find any information about him, but okay, so they all made them look like suicides. This is the meme a lot of people bring up. We don't have a body cam, so we don't get to have anybody else's information on it. Over the next 51 days, 14 adults and 21 of the 46 children total were released, leaving only 25 kids inside. You said that, but something like 30 kids were murdered. The fire that started simultaneously on all 3 locations, shown on an infrared video camera, was somehow started by the ATF or whatever. Time bombs? David Koresh told the mothers to take their children into the vault downstairs. 18 of the children that died were there, and 9 of the women that died were there. He had a bullet wound in his forehead from a rifle because he just sat forward and blew his brains out. Some of the children were shot at point-blank range. The claim is that it has to be the ATF doing it. Now, at the time all this happened, he was expecting that they were going to let him hand off his papers, his 4 copies of how the seals were going to open, 4 pieces of information, and they were going to surrender. And then this happened. And their plan was to go down in the basement. "20 children, 2 miscarried babies, and 56 adults died in the fire, by another estimate. Of the above, 78 people total, 20 died of gunshot wounds, according to a pathology report, which I can't get the details on because it was available for a while, but when you look it up, all you find are truthers that won't let you read it. They charge you money. Interesting. A toddler died of a stab wound to the chest. And the claim is this has to be ATF. No matter how much information is up, it has to be the government doing it. Before he went reasonable and said, give me a time to put out these 4 pieces of paper and we'll surrender, they talked about being a suicide pact. And at this point, it would have looked like the world's coming to an end. It's a suicide pact. 9 people escaped to tell the tale. You can look up the rock quarry information and tell me better about it, I guess. The military vehicles had lost their ability to have offensive abilities beyond being physically large objects. Their motivations for the bombing at the Edward P. Murrow building might have been created by truthers. Too bad the lies might have caused a lot more problems than they should have. You tell me. Thanks for watching. Good day.